All right. Well, I'll tell you what, we're going to get ready here. We're 1 minute after, and I see quite a few people still loading in here as we're talking, and they'll just have to catch up. So welcome to today's webinar. Drones are here. Is your city prepared? We have an amazing panel today. I'm joined by Brittany, Francis, and Christopher, and we'll get into their backgrounds and get into the webinar. But the focus of this is, for our different governments to think about, the number of drones that are rapidly increasing here in the United States, the number of businesses and residents that are using drones within these communities, but also the number of drones that are being used within city departments. So there's usage of drones in all different levels of government, the using of drones, the supporting of drones, the rules and regulations at the federal level, and how do you stay compliant and register your drone, and then understanding the different types of complex use cases, whether it be a simple recreational pilot to someone trying to do package delivery and getting waivers, and how does that work within a community, and then how does that work between the different governments, and what systems are in place. So it can be a bit overwhelming. So we're hoping that this journey and these stories will help people understand and learn a bit more about the frameworks that are out there, how you participate depending on what type of use case, what technologies are out there, and we'll go from there. So with that, my name is Michael Helander. I'm CEO and President at Airspace Link, and we help build out the digital infrastructure to support the safe use of drones at all levels of government and all different types of use cases of pilots. We're not drone manufacturers. We're not operators, at least in our job, but we are outside of that. But we do help build the systems to support drone operators so that it's easy for them to fly and stay within compliance, whether it be federal rules and regulations, or stay compliant within their COAs or their advanced waivers. So let me start with some introductions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we'll start with Brittany.
Thanks so much. Looking forward to a great conversation.
Oh, Brittany, I think you're on mute, or you're not on mute, but your voice is not coming through.
Let's try that again.
There you go.
Perfect. Yeah. Sorry about that. I'm Brittany Kohler. I'm the Legislative Director for Transportation and Infrastructure here at the National League of Cities, working on behalf of our 19,000 cities, towns, and villages to really work with Congress and the administration on the policy ahead for drones, especially with the FAA reauthorization this year. And so really looking forward to this conversation because I think it shows where we're headed and how innovative and interesting this space is going to be in the next few years.
Excellent. Thank you, Brittany. And Francis, we've been partners for some time now. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Thanks so much, Michael, and to the rest of the team. I'm really honored to be part of this panel to really support those interested and engaged in keeping their communities safe and really realizing that drones are not coming, but they're actually here in our community, be that recreational, commercial, or in their own day-to-day operations, as Michael mentioned. Having a partner, a really key partner in their journey to understand and implement your vision and strategy is key to success. And I love helping key partners like Airspace Link match up with our customers and meet them where they are today and realize that vision for a safer community when you're relying on UAS. So thanks for the opportunity.
Absolutely. And I do understand you're a partner, you have a partnership with National League of Cities as well. So we're all kind of connected in different ways.
Absolutely. A longtime partner with NLC, and Brittany and I have met many times. In fact, we sat in on a panel for transportation just at NLC in November. So good to see you again, Brittany.
Excellent. Christopher, you've been one of our first customers for about 3 years now, but you're unique. You have a unique play, so it'd be great to learn a little bit about Detroit Aerotropolis.
Yeah, thanks, and thanks for the invitation to join. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. So the Detroit Region Aerotropolis consists of 2 counties and 4 small municipalities. And we're right between Ann Arbor and Detroit. But the most important thing is we're home to the 18th busiest airport in North America, DTW, and a high-value cargo airport, Willow Run, which has an extensive history And so what we found is that with 4 Class 1 rail lines, 3 interstate freeways, and 2 large airports, from an intermodal, multimodal perspective, we've got all the key assets working for us to move high-value cargo. But the missing piece was low-altitude airspace. And so how can we help usher in the movement of high-value cargo in low-altitude airspace and build on all of the current assets we have? And what I'll do is I'll go into some of the community integration components as we have some test use cases for drones in our community, but also how we're working both locally, regionally, at the state level and nationally to make sure we're a leader in helping integrate drones into our community.
Excellent. Thanks, Chris. I'm looking forward to that. Let's see. High risk, moving around from participant to participant. So let me jump in here. I think I should be sharing my screen again. So let's take a journey. And this is really to set the groundwork of the integration of drones into communities and into our national airspace. So it can be extremely complicated when you start to integrate different levels of government, different types of operators into such a regulated space. And so one of the things that we've gone through as a company is really trying to understand all our customers, whether it be federal government, they're a customer of ours, a county government, a state government, an operator, a recreational pilot, a company going through the type certification, a company getting their beyond visual line of sight waivers, whatever that might be. It all ties together, and we had to put it into a framework because we get questions from communities all the time. Hey, we want to do this, and how do we handle this? And we got to complain about drones, and what about privacy? And hey, we just bought 20 drones. How do we fly them? It just comes at us with all these complexities. Hey, we want advanced air mobility. We want air taxis. How do we build a vertiport? This is our lives at Airspace Link. This is what we hear every day. And we're always like, how do we help them? And how do we change that? How do we use software to solve this? So that is what we're hearing in the market. So what we had to do is work with some industry leaders. We worked with AUVSI, we worked with National League of Cities, we worked with our customers, and we started to put a framework in place that helps us respond and the industry respond to these types of questions, because there's certain questions we have to ask before we can help solving problems. And some people just want to jump all the way to a very complicated use case without stepping through some of the simpler items that are out there. So as we talk through this, we talk through this set of levels. Think of this as the 6 levels of autonomy, just like vehicles. It's the same thing on the ground. So think of level 0, level 1 is recreational drone pilots, and level 6 as, you know, advanced air mobility, and there's drones flying around everywhere, like the Jetsonian age. So level 6 does not exist today. A lot of people want to get there, but there's a complex process to get there. Some things are foundational and are available today. Some things go through a complex waiver process, and some are to be figured out, and it's very gray and squishy. So we use this framework, and then within this framework, everyone has a part to play. The federal government, the local governments, the state governments, the manufacturers have to comply at different levels of complexity, and the businesses and citizens ultimately either want it, don't want it. It provides value to them. They can build a business out of it. It creates new jobs. So we have this grid system for the industry. So when someone says, hey, I'm a city, I want to do something, or I want to support drone operators within my community, or I'm a manufacturer that wants to build a drone that can fly 80 miles beyond visual line of sight, there's different requirements. So they fit along these slider bars along the complexity. So level 1 is, you know, regulations and readiness. Is the federal government ready? Yes, they have LANs. They have a drone registry system. They have ways to fly at night. They have a new remote ID regulation coming out in September. So they have a process in place at the federal level. At the state level, they just use a lot of the federal rules and regulations. But say the public safety says, hey, we want to fly beyond the rules and regulations. What's the process for that? Well, that's a tactical beyond visual line of sight waiver. It's getting a COA. There's certain steps there. So at each level, you can drill down into doing more and more complex things. But this is where we look at this format And if you're trying to do something that the community isn't aligned with, so if the federal government's at a certain point and the community's at a certain point, but the operator's all the way out here trying to do something, it really makes it hard on everyone. So you almost have to bring the communities to where you want to be. And a lot of communities, I'll be honest, are at a very low level, but they're buying a lot of drones and they're trying to figure out cybersecurity and how to use drones. And they have contractors using drones and bringing in data into their GIS systems, and how does that all connect? So there's a lot that happens in this. So we use this tool to help figure that out. And when we think about the people that are on this call, well, number one, the FAA rules and regulations, they manage the airspace, but they did put in a bunch of rules and tools that Airspace Link helps support those operators use to make sure they're flying compliantly. When you think about National League of Cities, they're really in that foundational area. There's a lot of drones being acquired today, not just for how do people fly within our communities, and how do we set up a drone park, and how do we create job training to become Part 107 licensed operators, and how do we start to use drones for dangerous jobs. They really sit in that level 1 and level 2, and they can create that support network for uses within the departments of the cities, but also supporting economic development in different use cases. So National League of Cities, when we think about them, they sit within this area and support that foundational. Esri, which is really unique, Esri is in 90% of all state and local governments today as their standard geospatial platform for authoritative data sources. So being able to tie the imagery that comes off the drones, or the roof inspections, or the pipeline inspections, or utility inspection data, or whatever it might be, public safety use cases, a lot of that data is geospatial enabled, and Esri is a great system to store that data and connect it with other departments, and it makes it secure. If they're in so many cities, solutions slide directly in to be able to support state and local government. So that's how they fit into this puzzle. And then I love how Detroit Aerotropolis takes those foundational capabilities and starts to move them into more advanced levels 3 and 4. In some cases, partnering with the states, partnering with the FAA, might become a test site, and start moving to more complex areas, where multiple cities get together and connect their cities into a larger infrastructure system. And ultimately, in order to get those bigger infrastructure funds to support drone integration, it requires the communities to create that demand gen, because ultimately their businesses and the residents are the ones that reap the benefit, whether it be electrification, food delivery to underserved populations, and so on. So I thought, and ultimately, as you go down this path, it starts to get to more advanced capabilities. So one of the things that a lot of communities kind of throw up their hands is we listed about 1,200 different words used for drones, whether it be Part 135 type certification, whether it be ASTM standards. It gives people paralysis how to even work with drones. So a National League of Cities will work with multiple groups to kind of put out a plan where there's a process and technology that allows the city to kind of go department by department to understand what are the pros and cons of using drones within their community, and then what are the pathways and to integrate drones into their day-to-day work life, but also into their communities for what we call drones for good. So that was a lot to cover, but I think it's really important because people just throw up their hands and it's so complicated, so regulated, so slow. But there is a path. There's a path, and we had to at least put one in place so everyone can help contribute to each other and move the drones programs through securely and ultimately safely. And that's where I kind of want to move it over to Brittany, because Brittany, this is really where we're seeing the most success, is where it starts with a single community and actually grows. It creates a demand gen and grows with the businesses to the state and then to the federal government to show, this is why we want to integrate drones, or how we safely want to do that. Tell us a little bit about your journey with NLC and drones.
So since I arrived at the National League of Cities about 6 years ago, one of the top topics was, how are we going to engage in shaping this new space for drones and now urban air mobility? And what does this mean for the regulatory handoff between local governments, state governments, regions, and of course, our cities? And everything starts locally, right? A drone has to take off from somewhere. And so we are really glad to continue, I think, as the National League, to put out foundational reports like Cities and Drones. That was one of the first reports that was out there to talk about both cities as users of drones, whether it's your economic development department, your public works department, your police department, your fire, search and rescue. Many communities are leading the way on the use cases for drones throughout the country. And so we have a really great community of cities who have developed a lot of expertise as users. But now I think we're moving into a time horizon where we have to look at this in the broader picture. And today was actually the first hearing for the reauthorization of the FAA. And one of the prime elements that Garrett Graves, who's now serving as the chairman of the aviation subcommittee, brought up was the need for us to make room in the FAA's construct for this new innovation. And we have always been really motivated by the idea that there is always room for innovation in the tools that we use as communities. And many of those flow quite quickly into the Esri space, where we're using images and analysis to really think through what's possible. And I pulled a bunch of case studies because I feel like it's very helpful for folks to perhaps wrap their heads around where they might be in this journey through case studies and through the idea of where we can be. So places like Davenport, Iowa are doing an analysis of their river walls, looking at, what are the risks, what's the condition, not putting people in harm's way to do those types of assessments. You have folks in Germantown, Tennessee, looking at how do we find missing persons? How do we do that more quickly? How do we make that work? You have San Diego, California, who has a bunch of use cases, but one of the favorites I think that is going to be really important to our larger cities is commercial night delivery. How do you keep more folks off the roads during the night hours? How do you fix that third shift? Make sure you've got enough deliveries, moving things across. You have places like Sioux Falls doing large-scale event management, really thinking about how do we look at this from a larger capacity when cities have different types of events within them. I would say Spokane is definitely leading the way on some of the water assessments that they're doing. And I was really intrigued by Warren, Minnesota is looking at heat loss in buildings. And that's just a really good sort of summary of all these places that are maybe taking it in different strides. But ultimately, we're starting to see the next level of conversation, which is going to be how do we collectively make decisions about what is the strategy for this region? What is the strategy for working with the community? How do we need to adjust our federal laws, our state laws, our local laws, and our ordinances to ensure that this is a compatible use for the community? How do we put some parameters around that really encourage innovation rather than withdraw it? And if there are some communities on the line here, I bet there are quite a few, I would associate perhaps the upcoming arrival of some of the drone questions with what happened during the arrival of scooters on city streets in full fleets, with a lot of questions about how do we maybe reestablish this new type of innovation into a system that might be built for a larger purpose, right? And something that serves everyone, but also serves this new purpose. And that's, maybe a loose example. There's some elements of that are very different. But I think we as cities quickly came to the conclusion that these were fleets that we could work with. There were ways that we could go about instituting scooter parking within our cities? How would we think about how we draw them into the areas that we want to draw them into? How do they move within our communities safely? Should they be on the bike lanes or should they be on the sidewalks? We're going to be having those conversations about drones here very soon, both through the FAA reauthorization process, which will set the tone for much of this work, but also through the communities that are leading the way. Great to see the work in Detroit, great to see the work in North Texas. I'm continuing to see wonderful insights from the LA community around how they might see and sort of set the parameters of communication with the community. They've set up a noise system sort of experience where you can go in and actually hear what would a drone sound like in your community. And that goes a long way to making this real for folks. I think right now drones are something that you see every once in a while in the air, but maybe not at scale. And I think once that scale hits, and we're opening up our skies to this, we're going to have a much different conversation that we're going to need to have. And that's where the frameworks and the work that Airspace Link is doing is so critical to having that conversation about where the handoffs are, where the joint roles and responsibilities can be. And frankly, what's going to make this practical? Because at the end of the day, a drone is a tool. And if it's used for good, that is an excellent way to move this forward. But it can also be a challenge to make sure that everyone sees that tool in the right way, and that we're all able to really see the economic benefit of this new space. And so I'll stop there just to say that we are really encouraged by what happened at the end of last year with Congress passing some early ground-to-air planning that I think is going to be revolutionary in communities thinking about this space. And that's the way that I think we want to think about it, is ground to air. What is the opportunity as we move into this space to really plan around both the ongoing existence of what's on the ground and then what needs to be put into the air and through our different regions.
Oh, that was excellent. You brought up a couple of things. One is you talked about like permitting takeoff and landing location. So we've been caught in that where we worked with a city, they said, hey, we want to put in a drone port, even if it was for a small drone for testing. Well, they didn't have, how do you permit a takeoff and landing location for a drone? They've never done it. So we had to work through that process. And then the state also, has a process for permitting helipads. So it gets into that weird spot right now that we're working through that as a company and putting tools in place. I think MDOT Aeronautics Group is really good, where they do a lot of the zoning of their airports and things like that and understand that area of conflict, and because they just went through a feasibility. So now they understand where they sit and how to help the communities identify, not just how to permit, but how to identify the right locations based on land use, airspace characteristics, hazards, and so on. So things are starting to fit together. It's just taking a little time to actually push a real use case through. And one community, it's still out there. It's been about 5 months of trying to figure out how to get a drone to fly through the community and everyone to communicate. So we do see those friction points, but we're seeing ways to connect them through real life use cases. You also said one of the things we noticed, we were at the National League of Cities conference recently, before COVID, when we talked to the communities, we're scared of drones, didn't know much about them. Now when we met, every single community that walked up to our booth has drones. There's a major shift in that mindset too, from being, how do we, stop or deal with them, to, oh my gosh, how do we deal with our own drones? So there's a shift happening over the past 12 months in that sense as well. So thank you for that. So with that, Francis, a lot of the data and the systems and where this comes into play is usually touching an IT department or a GIS department within a community. How does Esri play in that? Do they have tools? I think, obviously, I know SiteScan. How are they using Esri technology?
So when we look out there, Michael, as you mentioned earlier, Esri has a very large footprint in state and local government. Oftentimes we we talk about, populations over 100,000 have some footprint of Esri capabilities, most likely in public works or in the assessor's department. And that actual information, that system of record that you mentioned earlier, really acts as that information model to inform the Airspace Link set of products. And if I think all the way back to NLC 2019, where Airspace Link was the new kids on the block, and we were just learning about how to kind of enter into a conversation about drones, and a lot of folks were more reactive to the situation than proactive. And then at NLC this fall, we saw a lot more civic leaders coming up and saying, hey, how do I kind of maintain, retain, and keep my community safe? So that handshake between ArcGIS and Airspace Link is very real for that, because really it's that system of record that's going to inform those initial building blocks of where we might start to design and maintain our overhead infrastructure. And early on, this is over 5 years ago, when we actively recruited Airspace Link into our startup program, and we actually said, hey, there's something here with our site scan product that really we're out there kind of scanning a jurisdiction and saying, hey, this information is very well suited toward Airspace Link. So it was early on that we developed and really proceeded with an integration. So if you have site scan, you actually have Airspace Link inside, because that's going to inform that 3D model. And when you think about that kind of lean forward that Airspace Link had and Esri, that resulted in the ability for Airspace Link to actually achieve key specialties such as ArcGIS system ready. That means you're keeping pace with Esri's technology. And then, because of their persistence and their success with our customers, we also awarded them with our state and local government specialty, because they're making it fast and easy to integrate into cities that already have Esri technology, or really needing to leverage that Esri investment, if you will, and really being able to remark as IT infrastructure, if you will. And I look back at, again, Michael, our time in 2019 with the City of Ontario. That's become a really great case study for us that said, hey, we want to build a drone-friendly community. And this was before we really thought about a capability maturity model and a destination for their vision. And really, it was that learning over the past few years that informed where you are today. So it's been awesome to be a partner of Airspace Link, to join them in our sales and create this great outcome to keep cities knowledgeable that drones are here and keep them safe, because our constituents are saying, like Brittany had said, LA's got, what does that buzz sound like? And people are like, okay, well, if I hear that buzz, does that mean something good, bad, or is it indifferent? And I think communities who take on the challenge of establishing where they are today and where they'll be tomorrow with their drone infrastructure will be the constituents will benefit, because we'll be able to communicate to them, hey, there are drones flying and we are keeping that space informed and knowledgeable. And at the end of the day, safe, right, Michael?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll tell you what, a couple of things. We have some questions coming, and I'm going to grab those as we go, probably after Chris. One of the things about, Esri is that I think people realize when you go into a community or a government agency, it's really hard to bring in different type of technology. To be totally honest, like, is it pen tested? Is it cybersecurity? Are you bringing a new system that we have to go manage? And I think that's a real interesting use case, is that platform allows just to plug in and start to integrate your own drones and your data, and then also your community systems into that platform as well. And that's why we end up obviously partnering with Esri to have that, I guess, authoritative type platform as well. So, well, thank you. And a lot of things that we do in our back end has helped us build the solutions. We at Airspace Link, we've been a FAA supplier for LANC, which is low altitude authorization notification capability. We're probably in one of the most widely used systems for authorizing flights here in the United States. We're tied into 700 airports, and we authorize a heck of a lot of operations per week to make sure people are flying correctly. And that's in controlled airspace. And a lot of people don't realize that 40% of the population here in the United States is in controlled airspace. So, for them to fly compliantly, there's tools out there for them. And Chris, and that's how we started with Chris 3 years ago, is he was one of the early testers of Simple I mean, their first reaction in the city of Taylor, and again, so you know, Ontario and Taylor, we met these cities actually through National League of Cities 3 years ago before COVID, and then their first reaction was, hey, we're scared of drones. We're scared it's going to fly into the airport, to, you know, it being an economic driver. And I think Chris has a great story about that. So Chris, if you want to just give us a little bit of your story.
Yeah, thanks. So one of the reasons Detroit and the area in which we serve is so interesting is that for so long we've been a one company town. So, you know, if the automotive industry sneezed, everyone caught a cold, as the saying went. And more so when we started to look at the transition from the internal combustion engine to the electric motor, we became even more nervous because there's about 8,000 moving parts in the internal combustion engine. There's about 3,000 in the electric motor. And so those 5,000 parts that are no longer needed as we transition to the electric motor, we think about our tier 2, tier 3 suppliers in the automotive industry and how can we help them transition into a new industry. So that's the macro perspective, is how do we not want to be a one company town? How can we embrace the aerospace industry and the future of low altitude airspace so our manufacturers can pivot into this new industry? Now let's talk about a micro perspective. 3 years ago, one of the Aerotropolis board members, who's a mayor of one of the cities we represent, said, "Hey, Chris, there was a drone flying above my house. Who was that?" I don't know. I can't answer that question. And I don't know if we even can answer that question. And so through a partnership with Airspace Link, we educated ourselves and we educated our communities as to what safety and security measures will be taken in the near term and long term to answer that question. Who was flying that drone? Were they authorized to be there? And specifically, was it recreational or commercial? Has someone started a business in our community that we didn't know about? And could we tell that story? And so over the last 3 years, what we did is we started to work on the community integration component of this industry. And so 2 years ago, we went out to a golf course and we flew a drone from the restaurant out to hole 16. And we had local elected leadership. We had other folks come out and we wanted to show them how tangible this use case was. And this was just a fun news story. It landed on Fox 2 News and we had a few interviews. But what's more important is Congresswoman Debbie Dingell was there, local elected leadership were there. And what they were able to do was they were starting to hear it, embrace it, understand the use of the technology, and then talk to the community more about the potential use case. I would say that this led us to a more sophisticated operation last year. And so if we can go to Medical Mile, what we did is we started working with a hospital, Beaumont Hospital in Taylor, and we thought about the use case of flying an EpiPen or a COVID test kit delivery or a defibrillator out to somebody in need. And so what you're seeing here is a more advanced operation where the community came together and said, could we use drones for just-in-time medical delivery? And we did that, and we were successful in doing that. And local elected leadership started to really embrace some of the end use cases of drones. And so what I'll leave you with is where we are today. And so our partnership with Airspace Link and Esri and the National League of Cities is very strong because we're not there yet. It's a continuous learning curve. But what we're doing now is we're starting to look at diversity, equity, and inclusion. And rail, specifically some of the rail lines within our community could become future drone corridors. And some of the old brownfield sites that were logistics and distribution operations 100 years ago in Detroit that have been abandoned and need cleanup, could those be the future vertiports in our community that house lightweight cargo for drones to move? And so as we look at Detroit as a whole, we're starting to understand where these beyond visual line of sight corridors will be. And could we have the future of logistics and distribution on brownfield sites adjacent to abandoned rail corridors? And so what you're seeing is a new industry resolving some of the issues of the past. And I think if anybody wanted to speak more about that, we'd be happy to share that use case with you all. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Michael.
Nice job, and hopefully that video came through. I couldn't get the audio to work, and it hopefully didn't mess you up too much, but hopefully that came through. But those are really exciting, because if we think about, I'm going to stop sharing. What happened there is this started a simple project at a city to flying over a municipal golf course, which was in control, it was actually about a half mile from the airport. It was in controlled airspace, but it was also in a controlled environment. And then it went from that to, other businesses saying, hey, Beaumont Hospital said, hey, we want to start to do, lab to hospital deployments. And they did. So those operations were run for weeks. People didn't even know it. They just thought it was a helicopter, but at 200, 300 feet, it looked like a helicopter. No one even noticed it. There was no sound, and it went for weeks, doing test runs back and forth and doing deliveries. So it was really neat where it went from a simple, hey, we're afraid of drones, to having it on the golf course, to a year later to their businesses starting to use it. And now that demand gen has now created a bunch of businesses within Detroit Aerotropolis that have worked with the state to then create a demand for, cross-border deliveries between Detroit and Windsor, Canada, and bigger budgets for infrastructure. So it's very exciting what you've done there, Chris, just because it started from as simple as, hey, I don't even know how to handle a drone complaint, to now you're one of the leaders probably in some of the things that are happening in the country. So nice work. And obviously we're working with you to integrate that. And that kind of leads to one of the questions that's out there. One of the questions I'm going to jump into, and we can go back and forth between each other, but I don't want this to hang out there too long, but it was, let me see. We also have a community airport, freeways, 3 train metro, so very much like an Amazon distribution center. We also have city police drones. We're also in the middle of LA County with regional transportation networks and agencies. Would our local government be the initiator to collaborate all of these agencies to manage our low airspace? Or would that be the airport or regional transportation, county or state? Well, that's why it's so complex. Exactly what you just said. Because it fits in that framework, everyone's federal government's involved, understanding, working with the airports. Well, there's rules and regulations. In some cases, we're already connected to the air traffic control towers with Airspace Link with certain use cases. How to get your COAs and get those, and how to stay compliant within those. Working with the regional group, the county and the city, they all play a little bit of a role in supporting that seamlessness, because obviously as an operator, I don't want to have to go to each one of those government entities to figure out how I'm going to do my operations. And I also don't want to hunt down all the data required to support safety cases for the FAA. And I don't want to have to figure out how to put surveillance on buildings and so on. So what we do at Airspace Link is we help take on that burden with these communities as we connect a lot of those. We're already working with a lot of those groups that you had mentioned at different levels. It's just tying them together, but when a community is involved, it becomes the anchor. You become the beachhead or the anchor point for things, whether it be funding or things like that, because it has to be tied to that, closer to the businesses, tied to electrification, tied to social equity, tied to the economic impact. That's honestly where this really impacts the growth. So hopefully that answered your question. You are a pivotal point, not necessarily saying how to fly, but connecting all of them to you become the anchor in a good way of getting things moving forward.
Michael, I might just add that, having that conversation with your peers who you work with in your region can be a really helpful point of setting up that structure, and to think about, who is in the best position to do what, and what authorities do you each have. And there's a lot of possibility, I think, coming with these new ground to air grants, that we're going to see excellent regional communication around those opportunities. There's going to only be a few of them to start now that those are authorized by Congress. We hope to expand those in the FAA reauthorization so that more communities can dig in and really begin that ground to air planning. But would just encourage you to maybe start the conversation with that carrot in mind. And hopefully others will join you in sort of helping you to see, your path forward.
And I'd like to build on what Brittany said, because what we did about 12 months ago is we went after a National Science Foundation grant. And what that did is it brought all of the levels of government together, the community and an industry focus together. And as we built out that grant, we all kind of figured out our role in the ecosystem. And then we doubled down and we went after a $2.5 million Department of Energy grant. And then all of the stakeholders got together and we already had some background. So I would encourage you to find a grant opportunity and then reach out to your colleagues and go after it. And throughout that process, you'll find out, I think the dust will settle and everybody will have their role.
And that's a great point. You know, at Airspace Link, and this probably goes to one of the other questions, is there's close to $100 and some million that have been earmarked for helping support the integration of drones that we're tied to in multiple states right now. And they actually are tied to a community. We actually had to help the communities write it and then connect to the MPO and then connect to the county and the food banks and the operators. Who are the operators going to run and then submit that? And then the city or the state submitted it. So it's this is an infrastructure technology. If and that those new innovative way to move things you can tie to. And that addresses one of the questions here is, how are cities and communities going to monetize drone operations in cities? Permits for recreational and commercial users, landing and takeoff fees. And so I'll say from my standpoint, because we probably meet with 5 cities a day, we'll probably have hundreds of cities in our platform. Not one of them has really mentioned that type of thing. They do ask, how do we permit, period, when Amazon comes in. So that is a different use case. So you have to tie it to that. But when it comes to recreational pilots, we're actually supporting paying for drone parks. There's one we have budgeted $500,000 just for a city to have a place to go learn to fly drones and recreational pilot. So I'd say it's the opposite. Now, if it is a commercial use case and it's like, hey, I need to put in extra electrical and these things, that's typical building permitting. So that is the type of permitting that's going on. So from a what's happening is even Airspace Link provides our system for free because we're being funded by almost like an infrastructure. We're a system providing it for free to operators. There are some models down the road because we did just put in, we are working with Thales Group and up in North Dakota and Vantas is that we're putting in massive radar systems. Now, these are not for your recreational pilots. These are for 90, 80-mile flights. Really amazing technology. It detects, crewed aircraft systems so that if you're going to fly a drone beyond visual line of sight, that you had a digital visual observer. You're not paying for the airspace. You don't even have to use the system. It just allows you to get your waivers a lot easier and then provide sanitized airspace and understanding what's happening in the airspace when you can't see it. So you can connect to that platform. But that's because you want to do something that's extremely hard and extremely expensive. And at that point, it's pennies. And in some cases, I think the governments are going to pay for it. And it just really depends on that. So there's a lot of exciting things happening there as well. The monetization is the job creation. It's the manufacturing of drones. It's the use of drones. It's those type of economic impacts that really drive these governments recently. So that's what we're seeing from our seat. I'd be curious on I'll call you out, Brittany, because you probably talk to more cities, obviously, than we do.
Well, I think that this is a great question, is how this ecosystem truly works. Because right now, we in the current aviation space, planes have a fee when they take off and they land, and those fees go to the airport holder, and that airport holder is usually the city or county or state of that jurisdiction. And there's a cyclical process of investing as you go. And there's some sort of startup investments that make sense probably in this initial phase. But we want to get this system to a point where it is sustainable and somewhat sort of growing at its pace with the same level of safety that we see in the current airspace. Because I think that's going to be essential to public acceptance. So it's not a question that we should take lightly. It's a question that we should be really thoughtful about how it plays out and also how we think about the future of this space within the regular transportation that's happening on the ground. Because one of the things that is also unique is that the intention of this technology is that it is connected to where it's going. And that is going to be really critical, especially once you move into the urban air mobility space where you're taking passengers. So really, it's going to be an exciting time to follow this conversation thread. But hopefully we can get to a place where this part of the aviation community that's coming in is going to be recognized as an equal partner to those who are already playing in this space, from your everyday airline that you take to NASA. And that's how big this space truly is and how many stakeholders there are going to be. So when you think about this space, think about it in the context of how does your role as a local government fit within this larger ecosystem?
Nice. All right, I have some more questions. I'll keep them going. Let's see, I'll save this to the end, or we'll get you later. It says, is there a link to learn more about these use cases to pass along to our staff to consider as a local elected? So absolutely, we'll pull something together. Brittany will have our communications team send that out, tied to the framework, tied to National League of Cities, stuff like that. In Detroit, are all the commercial drone required to be registered and insured? No, but they are by the FAA if it meets certain requirements. So no, you don't have to register your drone at the state level, but you do at the federal level. So the FAA requires, if your drone's above 55 or 0.55 pounds or whatever the exact criteria is, that you go and register your drone. It's $5 for 2 years. So there's a registration process that is required at the federal level. We use drones in the city of Carson, California, but don't yet have a drone policy for our city. Are there example policies we can look at to help develop our own? There are, we can point you to some, I'm sure, National League of Cities. A lot of them are, they point to like what we call a fly safe program. A lot of it is pointing to existing rules and regulations of the FAA. So when people do, a lot of people don't know to go to the federal government. They may go to your website. So it's good to say that, yes, register your drone. It might not be with us, but with the federal government. Yes, if our city's in controlled airspace, absolutely, you need to, register your flight if it's above a half a pound drone and it's registered. And if you're under flying for money, you should have a Part 107 license and so on. So laying out the rules that exist clearly on your website, because people go there for authoritative information or it points them there. Absolutely. There's examples we will point to you. So we'll make note of that. Our communications team is on the line that will do that as well to all participants. All right, how are we doing on time? We'll go a couple more minutes. Let me just see here. Let me just read through one of them. I have a question about, is there a difference in implementation around more rural areas or smaller communities compared to larger metropolitan areas and communities? I can take that, or Brittany, if you want to, but my first reaction is yes, because it's different use cases. If you're rural, you're looking at precision agriculture. You're looking at pipeline inspections and oil rigs and those types of concepts. Medical delivery is big when people live so far apart. And, North Dakota had a great example where they had to send drones out when they got, surprised 2 feet of snow. And they sent drones out to do certain types of things. I can't remember what it was, but it was multiple operations to keep their citizens safe in a situation where they couldn't get to them. So very neat things that we're seeing at Airspace Link. We see a lot. Airspace Link, we don't do the operations, but we help them authorize them. So we get to see tons of use cases. And rural there's so many benefits out there. Looking for cattle. We just talked to a city, National League of Cities, that uses it to count deer. They have infrared and goes out and counts deer. This is incredible, the use cases coming out. So
I think that's a fair point, is that this has so many potential use cases, and the rural communities This is ultimately a fairly accessible tool that has many options for bypassing some of the challenges that different communities have. And whether you are in a congested urban area and you need to get an AED, life-saving equipment across, 4 blocked off lanes of traffic, or whether you need to get that AED into a mountain town where someone has collapsed, maybe in a ski slope area or on a hike, or has been lost. Those are all really important case studies. They have a value that transcends the area. But certainly, I think we'll see the difference in those use cases just sort of transforming with each area. But Francis, you also probably have some good ideas here as well.
It's good to hear the folks out there having that challenge of, hey, I'm in a rural community, I'm in LA, I'm somewhere in between in this Carson City, Nevada, but the steel thread really, Brittany, that brings them all together is, hey, we want to know who's out there operating a drone. We want to keep it safe and compliant and ensure that our community is really having timely communication about what's going on. And early on, when we engaged with Airspace Link, we said, there's several different ways we can kind of architect this type of solution, but why don't we kind of build this together, kind of almost in parallel, if you will. So they were continually getting information from us and us from the team at Airspace Link, and that resulted in really the deployment of a system that uses full ArcGIS licenses. So this product is not only powered by ArcGIS and your own system of record, but it actually uses full use ArcGIS license provided you by Airspace Link. So you have that confidence in the platform that is your own system of record, but also is reflected in the Airspace Link Connect and Launch products, be you a government trying to manage, maintain, and monetize, or a drone pilot just trying to announce the flight that you're going on or the delivery you're trying to make. So
great. Well, we have 4 questions still, and we're not going to get to them all, so we'll probably do a couple more. We'll see, because these are some good ones. One is questions about privacy protection. So this one is where we pull up the framework usually. I'm not going to do it, but you remember the grid system. There's privacy at every level. How is my federal lands data being, so we have to go, we're going through ISO compliance. We just got audited by the FAA. They use our system every day. We're on a whole different level of security for commercial pilots, Part 107, and then on recreational. So that's secured. We can't share certain data. And then you get into remote ID. What is remote ID? That's a big hot subject right now. Remote ID is think about that as a digital license plate that goes into effect September of this year. That means at some point, every drone in the United States, when you go to fly, needs to be broadcasting its location and information. Now, it's a unique model number, not the person, but it is broadcast publicly. So it is a little bit sensitive, but it's equivalent to my eyes being able to see a license plate on a car. So what is that for? Well, ultimately, they're going to put a tie into that registry system. Just like when a police department sees your license plate, they have access to the registry system to see who that is. And that gets into the bad actors issues and stuff like that. So there's a whole privacy around that. But what that does do when you do have remote ID and you're compliant, well, that helps allow you to do more complex flights and over people and things like that. So there's a give and take on that privacy information. Then you get into privacy of flying over people's homes. How do I feel about someone flying over with a drone every hour? I see, complaints all the time on my neighborhood app. Ooh, man, this drone's out over my house every day. It's hilarious. But so there's privacy. That is a real subject, and I don't know if that is going to make its way over time. That will be figured out. But that is something. So some of the more commercial drones, just so you know, the package delivery, like one company we work with has no cameras on their drone. Period. Like it's doing operations fully by sensors. So they're taking different tactics to remove that issue of privacy in that way. But there are some items there that we could go round and round with stories. But ultimately, it's about the benefits and how that's handled. So anything from anyone else in the group on privacy? That's a big subject.
I think it's important to just remember that the same protections.
Brittany, we lost you.
Oh, no.
There you go.
I would just note that one of the most important things to remember is that the same protections you have for privacy exist whether or not a drone is involved. So just think about the context of how you would handle it if it were something else. And that remains to be, a concern we need to put parameters around. But many of the conversations with communities ultimately comes with an understanding of the community of where is this drone going to be? Why is it going to be there? How long is it going to be there? How often is it going to be there? So time, place, and manner of operations and making things more normalized can be really helpful to the conversation. And so I think that is going to be an evolving area, but just remember that all of your privacy protections that you have as a city still exist.
Well, that was excellent. Well, I'll tell you what, I learned a lot on this panel as well. This was an interesting one, because I think we have really different groups, technology companies, global systems, a regional Aerotropolis, just to name a school, Aerotropolis, but a bunch of cities and groups getting together to create an economic engine. And then really a lot of these differentiators in these areas are around supporting drone systems to differentiate themselves, as we just don't have airports and rail lines, but we also have drone technology to support you, whether it be from a data standpoint, help you get waivers, put in heavy duty infrastructure to support safety cases and systems. So it's very exciting to have everyone here. And I really want to thank the panelists and all the great questions. And there's some more, and I want to jump into them so bad, but I will do my best. We'll answer those separate because they're all real good, juicy ones. And we live it. I think a lot of us on the panel are living a lot of these questions and doing our best to navigate it. These unclear waters as we progress the drone industry. So.
And I think that's why the things that you've provided today, Michael, are so key, because everyone has a look at this industry or a look at where their community is today as it relates to drones. They have a current situation they want to maybe react to or respond to, and a future vision that they want to attain. And all the questions really feed that what I consider a capability maturity model, or how you're going to mature your own drone program, your own drones in your community. So it's so awesome to have great uptake and great engagement. Thanks for making us part of your team.
Absolutely. And I'm going to put my BD hat, or as a company, is that, any city, there is a UAS integration readiness assessment. It's just a bunch of questions that helps build out a roadmap. And it allows us as a neutral platform to make recommendations on types of drones you should be acquiring and just supporting you on that journey. It actually helps you with your readiness. What is your city's readiness to use drones, introduce drones, or have drone ports? Really finding that spot on that framework that the city's at, where you're at, and where you want to go, and taking there. So if we can be of any help, we'll absolutely do that. And we have great partners like Esri and National League of Cities, and great customers like Detroit Aerotropolis that would love to partner as well, I'm sure. So thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.